Hi guys, it's Mrs. Mattingly here, and I am reading to you today Addison, Cooke, and the Tomb of the Khan, chapter 41, called The Golden Whip, and it is on page 406. Addison liked the weight of the whip in his grip. The handle was braided with silver, and the 8 feet of coiled, looping thong was constructed of interlocking golden links hinged together by a cunning design. He wondered what ingenious goldsmith had crafted it. Was it true the Khan had simply discovered the whip by a river as a boy and taken it as a sign he would one day rule the world? The truth was buried in the centuries. Nobody watched him impatiently. We're going to hide it in the forest, right? Addison's mind was racing like a gerbil on an exercise wheel. He thought about Sir Frederick's words, "Know thyself." He could either save the whip or use it to save his aunt and uncle. Or maybe there was a way to do both. I have a plan. As soon as we get out of here, you alert the Darkhead. I trade the whip to Madame Fang for my aunt and uncle. Once they are safely free from her, the Darkhead ambush Madame Fang and retrieve the whip. It's too risky, nobody said. Madame Fang isn't going to go down without a fight. You blew up her palace, Addison. Technically, that was Raj, but I take your point. It was an honest mistake, said Raj. It could have happened to anyone. Logan, please turn it down. I'm trying to record. Thank you. Addison stepped closer to the 2 Darkhead. You said yesterday you'd choose protecting the Khan's relics over saving someone's life. But what would you do if it was your family? A little bit more.
It's 5.
Okay. Nobody weighed it in his mind. He glanced at his sister. I don't know, nodded. Addison's plan could work. The Darkhead outnumbered the Triads. Nobody took a deep breath and looked at Addison solemnly. You may take the golden whip, but touch nothing else. Addison held the whip to his chest and nodded. Then he was on the move, descending the Khan's staircase. We have to go quickly if this is going to work. Eddie watched the team leaving. Wait, just so I'm clear, no gold? The group raced out of the mountain tomb, crossed the hidden necropolis, and climbed down the slippery chute into the secret mountain passage. They emerged from the rocky hollow in the dirt riverbed and dashed across the alpine meadow. Reaching the Eagle Cliff, they sprinted along the edge, searching for the spur that stretched across the gorge. Molly scanned the line of cliff wall and cried out. The dark-haired chieftain was standing on the far side of the chasm, pointing angrily at the golden whip. What have you done? Put it back! I don't know, shouted back across the gorge. It's all real, Uncle. Everything we've guarded for all these years. The chieftain drew his dagger and held it over his head. I'll kill all of you. If you kill us, said Addison, who will know how to return the whip to Genghis Khan's tomb? The chieftain hesitated. What do you want? I trade the whip for my aunt and uncle. Then you ambush the Triads and retrieve the whip. I cannot gamble with the whip. I cannot help you. He pointed to the river churning in the gorge 1,000 feet below. A Mongol may cross this river only to bury a Khan, and there has not been a Khan for 500 years. You knew about the necropolis? Asked I don't know. I know many things. I know I will never break my vows. I know I will not help you play games with the Triads. Return the whip to the tomb. Addison brandished the whip in both hands for the chieftain to see. I'm handing the golden whip to Madame Fang. You can either help us or lose the whip forever. The chieftain glowered at Addison. I should have killed you when I had the chance. You may still get that chance, but first help me. We can save my aunt and uncle and save the treasure. I Don't Know called to her uncle, "The triads are coming! Cross the river and help us!" The chieftain brooded silently, then cocked his ear to the call of an ibex horn, sounding an alarm. He stepped back among the pine trees and vanished from view. "He'll help us. I know he will," said I Don't Know. Nobody shook his head. Stubborn man. He'd rather lose the whip than break the rules. "We have to cross the river. Then your uncle can help us." Addison turned and raced towards the spur to make the leap back across the gorge. But by the time he reached the cliff's edge, the triads were already lining up on the opposite side, blocking his escape. One after another, Madame Fang's crew leapt across the gorge, even Aunt Delia and Uncle Nigel. Addison counted nearly a dozen triads working their way up the side of the cliff. "I can't do this alone. We're outnumbered." He turned to nobody. "Alert the Darkhad, quickly!" Nobody climbed up on a high rock and furiously blew a panic call in his ibex horn. Molly surveyed the plateau for another route down the mountain. She saw they were surrounded by 1,000-foot drops. "The triads are blocking our only escape. We're trapped here." Madame Fang inched along the cliff wall and stepped into view. Addison turned to I Don't Know and gestured to the sword hilt strapped to her back. "How are you guys with those swords?" "Not so great against guns." Addison grimaced. He realized his best move now was to stall for time and hope the Darkhad would arrive. "Madame Fang, what a lovely surprise. We were just admiring the view. How did you find us?" Madame Fang sidestepped her way along the cliff, edging closer to Addison. She called over the roar of the water that echoed in the vast ravine. "Your aunt and uncle finally became cooperative. I told them I still had you locked up, and if they didn't find the tomb, I would kill you." "How clever." "It worked. Your uncle suddenly told me about the great taboo. He even seems to know clues to the treasure." Addison shot a look at Uncle Nigel. There were fresh bruises on his stubbled jaw, and blood was crusted around his nose and lip. He looked wrung out like a sponge. "Are the Fang casinos traded on the stock market?" asked Addison. "Why, yes," said Madame Fang, confused. "I hope your stock craters," said Addison, and he meant it to scorch. Madame Fang shuffled closer along the cliff face, and Addison held up a warning hand to stop her. "Remember what I offered you in the dungeon?" Addison held up the golden whip so that it cast dazzling sparkles in the afternoon sun. "If I get the whip, I get my aunt and uncle." "You don't need them. This is what you came for." Madame Fang gazed upon the Khan's whip, her eyes reflecting awe, wonder, and greed. She advanced along the rocky ledge. Addison stretched his arm as if to toss the whip into the void. "I don't need the whip. I'll throw it away." Madame Fang froze. She was reading Addison and calculating. He sensed her fear of losing the whip, and it gave him confidence. "Send my aunt and uncle over, and I'll throw you the whip." "You think I'm naive? I can't trust the boy who burned down my palace." "I don't want to point fingers, but technically it was Raj who burned down your palace." Addison gestured to the top of the cliff where the stony precipice met the plateau. "Let my aunt and uncle climb up to the summit, then I will toss you the whip." Madame Fang turned to her triads. "Let them climb," she shouted. Aunt Delia and Uncle Nigel found handholds and footholds and worked their way up to the crest of the cliff to where the sheer rocks rounded off to a plateau. The summit was crowded in a wide field of flowers. Who trained his gun on the pair in case they tried to bolt before the exchange was made. It was now time for Addison to toss the whip to Madame Fang. She gestured impatiently. "What are you waiting for?" Addison could stall no longer. He whispered to I Don't Know, crouched beside him on the ledge. Where is your uncle? Where are the Dark-Had? He'll come, whispered I Don't Know. Nobody scanned the opposite cliff and saw no signs of the warriors. He won't break his vows by crossing the gorge. He's too stubborn. Addison continued to hold the golden whip over the edge of the chasm. He ran his free hand through his hair, and his fingers came out wet with sweat. I've stalled as long as I can. The Dark-Had are too late. Madame Fang yelled impatiently, her voice echoing back and forth across the abyss. Toss the whip now or we'll shoot them. Out of options, Addison was winding up to toss the whip to Madame Fang when he heard the drone of an engine. He looked up to see a helicopter hurtling through the air. Addison, an eternal optimist, immediately assumed this was good news. Perhaps Dax had acquired a helicopter pilot's license. When we saw the Russian flag on the large military chopper, he realized his situation was about to get much, much worse. The golden eagles, agitated by the roaring blades, took flight from their nests, flapping in circles around the gorge. Molly shouted to nobody over the din of the chopper. Where is your uncle? Blow the horn! Nobody desperately blew his ibex horn. He blew until his cheeks were red. He blew until the sound was swallowed up by the rumble of the helicopter. The chopper landed in the field of wildflowers, billowing under the gale of the blades. Still no Dark-Had came. Madame Fang and her triads trained their guns on the helicopter, watching nervously. Addison gripped the whip in his hand. He watched Boris leap from the suicide doors of the chopper, followed by a platoon of Vor. They seized Aunt Delia and Uncle Nigel, pinning their arms behind their backs. Boris ignored the triads and their guns. He ignored Madame Fang. He confidently closed in on Addison, who backed to the edge of the cliff. There was nothing behind Addison except a very long view of the valley and a very short trip down. Hello, Boris. New pants, I see. Boris looked down at his new leather duds and grunted. I know how the triads found us, but how did you? Boris stopped 10 feet from Addison. Addison's whole group was cornered on the cliff's rocky brink. We were eating lunch in the valley when the river suddenly dried up and reappeared a mile away. We got interested. Yes, we started an avalanche. It's a long story. Addison looked over Boris's shoulder. The Russians outnumbered the triads and held the high ground, weapons raised. The triads clung to the rocks on the side of the cliff, aimed their weapons right back. Madame Fang's eyes darted back and forth from Boris to the golden whip. Addison took a glance to his right at the 1,000-foot chasm with the river churning far below. He saw no escape. Boris stepped closer. Addison held the whip over the precipice. The trick had worked once, so Addison had developed an affection for it. Boris paused, calculating. Send over my aunt and uncle. The big Russian seemed to consider it. Addison scanned the scene. His eyes roved the chopper. A man in an elegant black suit stood by the suicide door, his face hidden in shadow. Addison felt fear, primal fear, in the pit of his stomach. The very sight of the man filled him with dread. Addison whispered a single word, Malazar. Boris read the fear in Addison's eyes. He took another step closer. Addison stretched out his arm, threatening to hurl the whip into the void. The Vor only smiled. You cannot destroy the whip. Addison's arms quivered. He clenched his teeth. The Russian took another step. You are a Cooke. You spend your life saving these relics. It's in your blood. It's who you are. You'd sooner throw yourself off that cliff than destroy the whip. Addison lowered his arm, defeated. He tossed the whip in the grass at Boris's feet. "Give me my aunt and uncle." Boris turned to the viewer who held Aunt Delia and Uncle Nigel pinned by their elbows. He gave a single nod of his chin. The Vory, I guess I'm saying viewer, but it's Vory, dragged Aunt Delia and Uncle Nigel to the side of the cliff, then shoved them both over the edge. Addison shouted. Molly screamed. Uncle Nigel clung to a rocky ledge, his other hand gripping Aunt Delia's wrist. Their feet dangled over infinity. Uncle Nigel's glasses slid from his face and tumbled hundreds of feet through the air. It was impossible to see where they fell. The canyon was clouded with mist kicked up by the river. "Hang on!" Addison yelled. Raj cupped his hands and shouted, "If you fall, aim for the white water." Uncle Nigel's arms shook with the strain. His hand slid along the crumbling rock, losing its grip. "Hang on!" Addison screamed again. Uncle Nigel looked at Addison, his expression sad and vacant. Addison realized that without his glasses, Uncle Nigel could not even see him. Aunt Delia never screamed. Uncle Nigel's hand slipped from the rock. He and Aunt Delia silently fell, vanishing into the mist. Dun dun dun. That's the end of chapter 41. See you next time.